Hello guys, how are we doing and welcome back to the channel. Today I have my first Hardpoint spawn guide for Black Ops 6 and today we are going to be looking at Vault. For those of you who are new to the series, I essentially break down the spawns, give you some general information, how to block spawns and some strategy and example scenarios that can hopefully make you a better player for when ranked play drops in a few days, actually in 5 days from now on the 21st of November. For those of you who are new to the channel, this will be the first time you see this, and I would love for some constructive feedback on this video. If there's certain things I could be doing better, if there's things I could be explaining more or better or more clearly, let me know, because this is the first one and I'm going to be battling them out for the rest of the maps, at least competitive maps in Black Ops 6. And obviously I want any improvements that are possible to be in the rest of the videos. So sort of treat this one as a trial. Before we get into the spawn guide itself, I just want to say I've made a overall ranked play guide, which you can find a link to in my Discord down below, or you can just click on the link down below. It will take you to the most recent version of that file, and it will give you, as I upload more spawn guides or another guide for a specific map on Black Ops 6 ranked play, it will be updated live on this file. So just to give you guys an example, this is what the file looks like. You can have this open on your tablet, your phone, your second monitor if you play with one, and here's the contents of it so far. So you've got all the callouts that I've done videos on recently. You've got the Vault Hardpoint guide, and all you need to do is go to that page. I think it's a little bit easier to do it on mobile, but all you need to do is go to that page, and there we have it, the Hardpoint spawn guide. This is a little bit of a teaser what you're going to see, but it gives you an explanation. Again, it gives you the general info, how to block, some scenarios, some strategy on every hill of the map. So yeah, check it out. Let me know your thoughts, and happy to share that with you and happy to develop that throughout this year so that you guys have just one place you can go to for all the information, strategy, techniques and whatnot for ranked play. It will have all the links, URLs to my videos as well. So enough with the intro. It's been 2 minutes. Let's kick it off. So P1 Hardpoint on Vault is in the middle of the map. Okay, so for those of you who are, as I say, new to this, I'm going to quickly go through what you're seeing on screen, because there's a lot of color, a lot of different shapes and whatnot. So the circles, the hollow rings like these, are spawn points. So that's places in which you can spawn. Next areas are shaded areas like this, which are typically the block points in which you can spawn. Now I do want to say, for any spawn point on Hardpoint, at least in competitive, if you are looking at the spawn or you can see the spawn, the enemy can't spawn on it. So you don't specifically have to be in these general areas. You at least, if you can see or your character can see it, it will block that spawn as well. And then another thing we have on the maps is the 2 hardpoints. So first one being the bright green one, and that's the one that we're currently assessing. And then the more dim, sort of shaded out version of that is the next hill. So you can see on this hill we're looking at P1, so that's the one we're focusing on, but it's always nice to have in the back of your head what the next hill is, and that's P2, which is why it's a little bit dimmer. So kicking it off, main spawns for this hill are pink and blue, or oil and P4, and teal is the alternative spawn to when both of these are blocked. So if both of these are being blocked, the next spawn is teal. The side the enemy are leaning towards will determine which pink spawn you spawn at. So let's say, for example, you've got the pink spawns, but the enemy's pushed towards this upper side of the hill, of the upside of the map, you're likely to spawn bottom. If the enemy team are spawned, pushed towards the pool area, instead of spawning here or here, you're likely to spawn a little bit further up, away from where they are, top here. So that gives you a little bit of info. Now the red spawns, the 2 rings here, are the last resort spawn, which happens when everything else is blocked. Okay, so bear that in mind, but hopefully this will be clearer as we go through it. Now onto the blocking. All spawns can be blocked, as I say, by being in sight of it or being in the block spots itself highlighted on the map. To block blue, i.e. P4, you can be pushed towards this side of the catwalk, in the nest, book, square, this general area over here. Now to block art spawns, you can be pushed up to the BS and D, which is about here, or generally towards this corner of the map, okay? Now in order to block any pink spawn, you literally have to be past this pink zone here, past P1, in this, past the hall area here, and in this area. That'll block every single pink spawn 95% of the time, okay? This will then spawn the enemy blue, unless this is blocked, in which case it will spawn them teal, okay? So let's say, however, let's say an enemy is in the pink area, that'll spawn you blue. But let's say they're in the pink and blue area, that'll spawn you teal. But let's say there's an enemy blocking all three areas there, that'll actually spawn you in one of these red zones. Now, when the red spawns are opened up, it follows the same logic as pink. So let's say, for example, the person who's blocking the pink spawn initially is over this area here. The red spawn you'll spawn at is here. But don't forget, the red spawn will only open if the other two spawn locations are also blocked. Otherwise, you'd have just spawned to that spot. Okay, so just bear in mind, and as I say, this will hopefully be clearer as we go on. This is, by the way, the most complicated hill on this map. So it does get easier to understand. So even if you go, this looks too complex, bear with me. P2, 3, and 4 are way easier to understand than this one. This is a super complex one. It took me a while to get my own head around. So let's take some scenarios to hopefully clear it up a little bit. So thing to remember in Hardpoint generally for any hill is if your team spawns isn't changing, it means the enemy haven't moved. And you only really want to take note of where your team is spawning if it changes, okay? Because that means the enemies have moved and it gives you an idea of where the enemy is based on where you now spawn from where you were spawning before. Now, if you spawn P4 and you spawn with your teammates, there's nothing to worry about. It's just your default spawn. If you spawn art and you were spawning P4, it generally means the enemy has started to push up towards catwalk and pool area, and as a result, they're blocking this spawn. Now, if you spawn art or P4 and you notice your teammates starting to enter the pink zone, be very careful, as it could mean the enemy spawns parallel to you. Now, what I mean by parallel is that both you and the enemy team are spawning the same side of the map. So let's take an example, like I've just sort of said. Let's say you've spawned here, but you notice your teammate is all the way over here getting kills. The enemy team, as long as you're not blocking it, are going to spawn art. So just be very careful when you're running through here. Check your minimap. Hopefully your teammate's communicating with you. And if they're saying, I'm in cheeks, I'm pushing for P2 spawns, just be very careful. The enemy might literally spawn the building next to you. Okay. Now, if you spawn trophy or P2 and you were spawning oil, which is the generic pink spawn, typically means the enemy is pushed up the opposite side of the map a little. So as I say, if you spawn P2, it means enemies pushed up this side. If you spawn trophy, it means the enemies pushed up this side. It's fairly self-explanatory. Now, if you were spawning P4 or art, and now you happen to be spawning trophy or P2, that means the enemy have pushed up towards the opposite pink spawn to you. For example, if you spawn P2 in this scenario, it typically means the enemies are P4, art, and trophy, leaving this the only viable option left for you to spawn in. So, strategy-wise, the spawns you obviously want are the pink spawns, as they're considerably closer to P2. It's the obvious spawn, in my opinion, and therefore setting up for P2 is far easier when you have the spawns on this right-hand side of the map. That means the enemy is now, neither left or right spawns are considerably advantageous for P1 itself, but I would just say this is a better spawn to have because of how close it is to P2. Now, the easiest way to maintain these spawns is to have someone in the pink area, so in this zone, the pink zone, probably bottom cat stairs or somewhere like that, or in the hall, blocking this pink spawn, okay? Now, as soon as you have someone in this pink area, the game will look to spawn the enemy blue or teal, so make sure at least one of these are left open so that the enemy team don't somehow spawn on one of these red zones, okay? So have these blocked, leave one of these two open, and the enemy team will spawn on that available spawn. Very simple. As soon as you have someone in the pink area, obviously the game will look to spawn them there. As I said, once your team starts to spawn at pink, it's ideal to have someone pushed up the pool area, which will, lean the enemy spawn towards the teal or towards art, which means they've got a further stretch towards P2, and that's the furthest possible spawn from P2, so that's the ideal setup, okay? So, P1, super complex. Essentially, if anyone's in this pink spawn, it will spawn either one of these two out. The best way to set up is to have someone in pink and someone blocking the blue spawn. It will spawn the enemy teal or in art, which is far from P2 and fairly, decently away from P1 as well. So P2 is a lot easier to understand, okay? So as I say, a lot easier to understand. Now the main spawn is tank here in the pink area. That is the main spawn. No matter who's holding P2, whether it's your team or the enemy team, that is the spawn that the game will prioritize, okay? And players will spawn here no matter what, as long as it isn't actively being blocked. That's the first spawn the game will put them to. Now the blue spawn opens up when the pink spawn is blocked. Okay. Now if these two are both blocked, it then opens up the teal spawn, and then if somehow P4, T4, and tank spawns are all blocked, they'll spawn middle. Now this is called T4. If you haven't seen my call out guide for Vault, it's the little palm tree heady sort of thing next to the nest, and that's where the blue spawn typically is. So blocking. Now, as I said, if the pink spawn or the tank spawn isn't blocked, the enemy will spawn there no matter what, even if you're on P2 or if your team are on P2. And pink spawns, unfortunately, tank spawns are only blocked through a line of sight. So you need to be able to see into this area here in order to block it. So that means you have to be, you know, in this little cut in order to see it. You can be on top of this Jeep. You can be just generally in this area here in order to block this tank spawn from the, well, spawn to block the enemy from spawning there. That'll mean your team can spawn there, but I mean your enemy can't because you're in this general zone. Now, in order to block the blue spawn, you just need someone pushed up past pool, top cat, book, this general area there, and that'll spawn the enemy's back P4. And as long as you haven't pushed up too far, that's where they will spawn if you've got blue, if you've got pink blocked and you've got blue blocked, okay? Now, if you somehow push too far up towards P4 and you're also blocking this teal spawn, the next one that opens up is yellow. So just make sure you're not getting too pushed up because it will spawn them there. But if you're on the hill, they're not going to spawn there. So what happens if, let's say, for example, you've got an enemy, you've got a teammate who is blocking pink spawns, as they should be. There's someone on the hill, and then someone's going rogue sort of in this vicinity here. That'll mean they're blocking yellow, pink, blue, and teal spawn, which is why red spawn is a final option for the enemy team to spawn. So just be aware of your teammates. If you notice, you know, they're pushed up a little bit too far, it might mean that they can't, the enemy team aren't spawning at either of these two, so they'll be coming from middle, okay? So let's take some scenarios here. So if you spawn tank, whether your team are on the hill or not, it simply means the spawn was left open and no one is blocking. As simple as that. There's nothing else to read into it. It just means it was open to spawn in. Now, if you spawn at T4, it means the enemy has someone blocking the tank spawns. Simple as that. Now, if you spawn P4, which is this teal color here, it means the enemy is blocking tank spawn and has someone pushed up a little bit further towards T4, whether it's inside near the catwalk or outside near the diving board. That generally means you can't spawn directly here. Now, if you spawn yellow, it generally means the enemy is blocking T4 or P4, and they may have someone blocking the tank spawn too. So just be very careful that if you spawn here and you know you're not sure if they're back here, or you know, it generally means that the enemy have got control of these two spawns and this one, and as a result you've spawned here. You'll only do that if your team are currently obtaining the hill. If they're obtaining the hill, obviously that won't happen. But it can also happen if the enemy team, let's say you get a 4 wipe down. That can sometimes mean this opened the spawn up because the enemy have no map control whatsoever. They're spawning all the way here. All 4 of them are here, so you just spawn there. That can sometimes happen. But it's always worth, as I say, if you ever spawn yellow, just check that the enemy hasn't spawned tank, just in case, because you never know. And it takes 5 seconds, and it saves being caught with your pants down. Now, if you happen to spawn middle, it means the enemy are likely on the hill, blocking tank spawn, and are also pushed up enough to block the T4 and P4 spawns. Okay. So strategy-wise here, getting tank spawns is essential to have good hill time on P2. Fighting for this early on and having someone on the team blocking at all times will mean the enemy has no choice but to spawn out. That's simply what it means. Once they spawn out, you can then have someone from here push towards T4, which will spawn the enemy even further out towards P4, which is obviously the furthest spawn point to P2, which is really good. Don't forget, obviously, when anyone's pushing, you still need someone to sit blocking tank. Otherwise, the enemy will literally just flip and they'll spawn behind you, which is obviously not good for anybody. Now, fighting for these tank spawns towards the very end of the hill is a little bit pointless, as you really want art spawns, which is here for P3 and P4. So when the hill gets to the latter half, let's say there's 15 or 20 seconds, you want to stop fighting for these tank spawns and just settle and get set up ready for P3. So P3 is actually even more simple than P2. Okay, it's super, super simple. The main spawns are pink, which is bottom art, and blue, which is back trophy. And you'll generally spawn whatever side your team are on, and that's as straightforward as it gets. Now, in order to spawn teal, both blue and pink need to be blocked, And yellow is the secondary spawn for pink and opens up when the blue team have pushed up enough to block pink, but not quite block yellow spawns, okay? Now, in order to block these pink spawns, you need to get through to P3. So let's say you're spawning blue. In order to block the pink spawns, you need to push through P3 enough to block it. And that will flip the enemy spawns, causing them to spawn teal. Unless this is also being blocked by your team, in which case they'll spawn back garden yellow. So it sort of goes either of these spawns, but if either of these spawns blocked, it'll be teal. If that's also blocked, it'll be yellow. It's fairly straightforward. Now, the easiest way to block both pink, which is art, and yellow garden spawns is to maintain control of art, being art itself. And thankfully, that is also a really useful position to watch over P3. There's a nice little balcony there where you've got a good LOS across this whole line just here. But that will just guarantee the enemies either spawning here or here. Simple way, sit in art. If there's one lesson you learn at P3, just make sure someone on your team is art. That simple. Now, as I say, if you're in art, the enemies will spawn out unless the enemy team has control of P3 or they push past P3, which will spawn the enemy teal. Now, when both teams are fighting in art to maintain good spawns, what often happens is a parallel spawn opens up, which, as I said, it means both your team and the enemy team are spawning on the same side of the hill. So let's say I've got a teammate in art, the enemy team are also in art trying to get that art's control. It will mean that any kills they get will spawn them out at one of these two, and then any kills my team get will spawn them out at the other one of these two. So what often happens if you know your teammate's in a hectic gunfight here, just check that when you spawn in at either of these spawn points, that enemy's probably spawned at the other one of these spawn points, okay? So you're probably going to witness a gunfight fairly quickly. So let's take some scenarios here, okay? Now, if you spawn art or trophy and your team are there, no need to panic. It's a regular spawn. Simple as that. Now, if you spawn garden and before you were spawning art, it simply means the enemy has pushed a little bit further up and have most likely gained control of P3 totally. And it can mean that the enemy is on their way to fight for art. So be ready for a gunfight coming off spawn, because it does mean that you'd have spawned pink if the enemy team weren't somewhat pushed up towards this left-hand side, okay? Now, if you spawn tank and you were spawning back trophy here, it usually means the enemy are blocking a spawning pink. It's quite as simple as that, but they've pushed through P3 and therefore blocked this trophy spawn. So just be very careful when you're running off tank and you were spawning blue. It just means someone from the enemy team is pushed up into this area here, meaning that they're probably waiting, looking for a cut off your tank spawn. So if that's the case, it's often a good idea to wrap around and try and pinch them like that, rather than just running straight forward. Now, if you were spawning art and you end up spawning tank, it generally means the enemy team have managed to get full control of art, which is the worst case scenario in this hill. But they've also got somebody who's around the trophy spawn, otherwise you'd have spawned there. So just be very careful that if you flip from here to here, it generally means they've got someone in art and they have someone in trophy, or either watching the cut, reading the spawn really well, or they've just come off the spawn themselves. So strategy-wise for P3 on Vault, obviously you need to try and get the art spawns as soon as you can and defend art like it's the hill itself, because P3, it's a bit of a mishmash hill, but P4 is a real good money hill. So you want to try and prioritize this art control as early as you can. This may mean sometimes pushing through the middle. If you don't somehow get the pink spawns off the start, it may mean that instead of just running directly to P3, someone on your team decides to go through middle, or even takes a real long route through pool to get to this garden and pinch art and therefore spawn the enemies out. Now, as soon as someone on your team manages to get control of art, or at least are playing their life in art, it will spawn the enemy out. This will mean that your team can then focus on kills, turn around and wait for them to come from tank spawn, which typically is the spawn they're going to be at if you were spawning teal and you somehow managed to flip. Now, if you're really struggling and you haven't been able to get art control towards the end of P3, and there's now less than 30 seconds or so left of P3, give it up completely and just try and wrap around and put full focus for your team to wrap around and just try and get garden control, as I say, through the longest, most available route possible, or the safest route possible, so that one, you're not caught with your pants down running through middle map, and two, you can get there safely and just make sure you can guarantee the initial spawn for P4. Talking to P4, again, a super simple hill to understand. The main spawns here are pool, which is blue, and pink, which is back garden. Okay. Now, teal, or what we're going to call hall spawn, is the first alternative spawn, which will open when both these two spawns are blocked. When teal, blue, and pink spawns are blocked, it will open up yellow, which is back P2. So yeah, you'll spawn at either of these. If these are blocked by the same team, this spawn will open. If all three of these are blocked, this spawn will open. Simple as. Now, you can block the pink spawn, which is obviously the considerably better spawn for this hill. It doesn't take a genius to work that out. From being in the garden, being the backside of P4, or being the backside of art itself, pretty much in view of it. In order to block blue spawn or pool spawn, you need someone in nest, book, square, that general area, and that will force the enemy to spawn teal in the hall, like so. Now, if the player blocking blue pushed even further up towards the catwalk, which is why there's a little teal bit here, that will block teal itself, because it's too close to teal, it's too close to blue, and it will look for the next available spawn, because these two are blocked. So make sure, as long as you're blocking here and someone's pushed up to catwalk, the likelihood of them spawning back P2 is very, very high, because they've got no other place to spawn. It's quite simple. Now, if both teams are scrapping over P4, it often means both teams are therefore blocking garden spawns, which can often lead to, you guessed it, more parallel spawns. So what will happen, let's say both teams have got people in or around P4 fighting for this garden hill, it probably means both teams are blocking it, which means one team will spawn pool and one team will spawn hall, or teal or blue. So again, if that's the case, and you know that's the case, just be very careful that when you're running out of these spawns, just to check your corners and make sure you're looking parallel to you, or I guess it wouldn't be parallel at that point, but just checking your left and right as you're running out of these spawns. So some scenarios for P4 on Vault. If you spawn with your team at either pool or garden, it just means you've got one of the two primary spawns for the hill, and that's just your current spawn, so nothing too much to note. Now, if you go from spawning pool to spawning hall, good rhyming, it means the enemy are blocking both garden and pool spawns, and therefore that's why you've spawned there. So expect a gunfight around book, square, this sort of area here when you're leaving your hall spawn, because that's probably where an enemy is lurking. Now, if you go from spawning garden, spawning to any of the other spawns, it means someone from the enemy team has managed to get pushed far up enough into garden to block that back spawn, or push through for P4 enough to block that back spawn. And you're likely, to be fair, to spawn behind the enemy, because you're used to spawning there. Enemies probably spawning at this point. So realistically, if an enemy somehow gets into P4 or block garden, you spawn behind them. So just wait for, again, you spawn teal, check for gunfights, pretty much immediately off spawn around this sort of area. Now, if you ever spawn back P2, this tells you the enemy is likely scrapping over current hill time or lurking somewhere in the garden, blocking this back spawn. It also tells you the enemy must be sort of catwalk, or it means there are two enemies, one of which is blocking pool, which means they're in this sort of nest area here, or they've just come off pool spawn itself, and an enemy is just coming off this hall spawn. Okay, so pretty much if you spawn here, it means there are bloody enemies everywhere and you're behind a lot of them. So strategy-wise on P4 on this hill, it doesn't take a genius, as I said before, to figure out that garden spawns are the preferred spawn to have in this hill, which means playing for garden control is vital for a successful hold of P4. Now, arguably, when it gets to the end of P4, our focus probably should go from P4 to P1, and having garden control isn't essential, so just bear that in mind through the latter half of P4. So once you have garden control, which is obviously what you're going to try and do, obviously it takes winning gunfights to get there, but if in order to be the better team, in order to deserve the win, you should be winning gunfights realistically. So once you get control of garden, take on the first wave of enemies coming from middle map area or pool area, and once you win those gunfights, and so when you've got pool garden control, you know they're going to be coming from middle, okay? So you can set up, you can sit on these jeeps, you can sit scaffolding, you can sit top P4, you can sit top art, take on the first wave of enemies knowing they're going to be coming from front, get your kills, and then ideally you would like someone to move up towards this blue block area, towards, book, towards square, towards nest, general area up here, and what that will do is cause the enemy team to spawn even further away in hall. Now, that's probably the easiest hole to have, because it means that the enemies are likely to only really flood, they're either going to spawn here and run, towards catwalk, or they're going to run through mid. And it essentially means that you can communicate to the people who are back here, watch your middle, and this player here can watch cat, and it just means it's quite predictable. If you wanted to get really fancy with it and you wanted to spawn them all the way over here, you need to make sure that somebody is top catwalk and therefore blocking both hall and pool. You have somebody back garden, blocking garden, and that will spawn the enemy all the way over here. And that's what you can do if you have a really good, well-structured team. But I'd be satisfied, if I'm being completely honest, with just, blocking pool, spawning them hall, meaning that they've got maybe 2 main options to run. Now, when it comes to the end of P4, as I said, it's ideal to allow the enemy to spawn pink because it's quite away from P1. And you want these right-hand side spawns for P1 and P2, as we've just seen. So that's doable by leaving one player on your team just getting the scrap time at P4 and have the others full charge towards P1, towards this right-hand side of the map, which will spawn the enemies back to garden. And that's it. There's the first spawn guide for Vault. I know it's a half-hour-long session. I know there's a lot to learn, but in order to be a really masterful ranked play grinder, a hardpoint grinder, you're going to need to know all the info. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you've enjoyed the video. Let me know if it's been useful, and let me know if you have any constructive criticism or feedback about how this was formatted. And yeah, enjoy your frying next time you load into Vault. Ciao for now.